Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you hear this sound effect, there's the sound effect. And I stop it really quick because I don't know if they can sue me or not. Then you know you're in for an episode of I don't know what it's got, like a horror-ish kind of horror-ish episode of the bathtub. We're going to talk today about Algernon Blackwood. Um, after we had a huge that we're just coming down from that big extravaganza. It was just such a wild ride, that 2000 subscriber episode. We sent all the prop department were up here. They stayed with us for a few days doing all those special effects. I sent them back today. I dropped them off at the freeway and they hitchhiked back to Pismo, and I'm sure they got home safe. I don't know, but we're very excited. Thanks for everybody's lovely wishes and all the nice notes you all wrote on our YouTube page and our Facebook page. And today we thought get back to normal, because it was such an exhilarating high pitch of excitement that we had for that 2,000 subscriber episode. So today we're going to go back to Algernon Blackwood, and it's basically because I sort of screwed up. So I slipped in the bathtub. That's basically, I slipped. I'm the master bather, and sometimes I'm masturbating so hard and so consistently that I slip in the bathtub and I say something really stupid. Almost every episode that happens. I talked a little bit about the first volume of the Fontana Book of Great Ghost Stories a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about the books or stories that were in it, and I just rambled on as usual. And I made a stupid mistake that someone caught me. I referred to the Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood, which is about a guy who gets lost. I referred to it and I described it as if it were the Willows, which is another Algernon Blackwood story. The Willows is probably his most famous story. The Wendigo is probably his second most famous story. And I talked about it. I had never actually read the Wendigo. I'd actually skipped past it because I thought it was the Willows. I'd completely confused the two stories altogether. And they're both longish, kind of weird supernatural stories set in the woods. And I just totally screwed up. I hadn't read the story. I said it was a good story. I didn't know. And then one of our bathing buddies, Kurt Garrett, put a little note on and quite diplomatically basically said, "You screwed up. You said the wrong thing." And so I said, "Well, I better go actually read the Wendigo. I better go read that damn story since I told everyone it was a good story." And I went back to this volume called the Algernon Blackwoods. It's called Ancient Sorcerers and Other Weird Stories. It's edited by the amazing S.T. Joshi, the sometimes annoyingly amazingly erudite and productive S.T. Joshi. He just does so many damn books, and he's done so many really good volumes and editorial work, and he's just a lot of wonderful stuff. And we like all the stuff he's done for Penguin. And I had gotten his books quite a while ago, and I finally sat down and read it all the way through. I had only read the first couple of stories, and I thought they were interesting. And now I just spent the past week reading through it and became a big Algernon Blackwood fan. I told you guys all, I've never read most of this stuff. I never read Lovecraft. I never read weird fiction. I'd never read Arthur Machen until this past year or two. And they were sort of contemporaries. They knew each other fairly well in London. They were both involved with some of these weird, like, theosophical societies and Golden Dawn and groups like that. So was Yeats, by the way, William Butler Yeats. So sometimes if William Butler Yeats did it, it was sort of cool. But if these guys did it, it's considered weird because they were writing kind of horror-ish fiction. But they're all equally good writers. I think it's unfair to say Yeats is great and Algernon Blackwood is not, or Machen is not, because Machen and Blackwood are amazing. They're incredible writers. And I became a huge fan of Algernon Blackwood this past week or two, reading through these really unusual, powerful, strange, haunting, involving stories. Very different from Arthur Machen, but very, very good. And I want to talk a little bit about him today. So the stupid thing I said, I confused these two stories, which are very, very different. One is called The Willows. And The Willows is like a lot of Algernon Blackwood stories. He was a big nature lover. He loved to go on long, long hikes. He traveled all over North America and Canada and went into some of the most wild parts of the world in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And in England, the New Forest, he was a big lover of nature. And he would love to go out walking, camping, and going off on these long excursions throughout most of his life. And he wrote a number of his stories are like the Willows, about people going on these canoe expeditions and recognizing that there's these sort of weird supernatural forces out there in these woods. I don't want to tell more than that, except they're kind of like Henry James with a little bit of mescaline on him or something, a little bit of paranoia. And I think much more, I'm not a big Henry James fan, but it has that kind of experiential, haunting, rich prose, very little dialogue. It's almost all experiential, how these characters feel and see and look at the world, what they're thinking about. Very philosophical fiction. They're not horror stories, as I always thought this stuff was, with monsters, killing people and eating their eyeballs and stuff. There's very little violence that I can recall in any of the Blackwood stories. This wonderful edition that Joshi put together with a great introduction as usual and lots of great material in the back is a really wonderful read, and it covers a lot of Blackwood's career from the Willows through the Wendigo, which I didn't like as much. I don't know, when I actually read it, it has similar to the Willows, except that there's this kind of creature out in the woods which we never quite see, as I recall, and it kind of has this transformative effect on some people, and it's kind of this haunting presence. It's a good story, but it's not my favorite. There's a story in here called The Man Who Found Out. It's going to be one of my favorite weird stories, horror stories of all time. Reminds me a little bit of Thomas Ligotti. We have a lot of Thomas Ligotti fans out there. And it's about a guy, some philosopher, who goes off in search of the meaning of life. And he comes back from searching for the meaning of life. And basically what he finds out is it's horrible. It's just, what he learns is just horrifying. And he I don't want to tell the story much more than that, but he passes on the secret of what he learns to his friend of his. And it horrifies his friend. And it's about how this guy learns to live with this thing he didn't want to know about. It's one of the shortest stories in the book. It's an incredible story. My favorite story is called there's a number of good stories in this. The Man Whom the Trees Loved. It's probably the one that involved me the most, and it was a very interesting story about a guy who, again, it's connecting with these supernatural forces out in the world. It's set in the New Forest in England, and it's about a man who the trees are kind of this presence, this kind of sentient presence, who fall in love with this guy, and they want him. They want him to be a part of them, and they're kind of he's just constantly going off on walks and excursions. You know the way when you go for a long walk and you just kind of just lose yourself in the walk. And he loves to go on these walks. And the story sort of becomes about his wife and the wife he leaves behind, and the fact that the wife starts to realize that this presence that wants her husband hates her. It loves the man, but it hates her because it wants to prevent her from keeping him away from them. Really unusual story, a credible story, very similar to the last story in here called Sand. Again, they almost always are about individuals going off into this kind of environmental, natural world, which is at once entrancing and at the same time deadly. And not deadly, it's not the wrong word. It's quicksand. It's like swallowing these people up. I love these stories, and I've become a big Blackwood fan. I actually wrote S.T. Joshi briefly about it, tell him how much I love this guy's work, and he said, yeah, he wrote lots of great books, but maybe too much, and I don't know. He wrote a lot of books, a lot of novels, lots of stories, so this is a good place to start. I do want to do the John Silence books, the John Silence stories. One of the most famous John Silence stories is Ancient Sorcerers. That's the title story, Ancient Sorceries. And John Silence, from this one story, is a guy who basically investigates strange phenomena. And it's about a man he meets who is called into this village. And he goes off into this village. Really seems like a lot of Lovecraft stories that came later. Lovecraft was very influenced by this. And he goes into this village and he finds this kind of history of associations. There's a lot of kind of theosophical ideas in there about kind of past lives and people reliving past lives, and that kind of comes back again and again, as does the notion of this kind of environmental world that's kind of calling you. Really unusual book, really unusual writer. I can't if you like this sort of stuff, and if you don't like this sort of stuff, I never really thought of this stuff that much. I really recommend it. I also picked this up. I'm sorry, I bought it on Kindle. I hate to do it, but sometimes I can't avoid it. I picked up Straight Man by Mike Ashley, who I'd known his name for years. I've never met him. It's his biography of Algernon Blackwood. It's called The Extraordinary Life of Algernon Blackwood. I highly recommend this biography. I'm about halfway through it. I'm going to read my way through it like I do with some of the writers we've talked about, where I'll read along when I get to the next book of stories by Algernon Blackwood, which I will read, probably the John Silence stories. I love this biography. I think Mike Ashley's a really good reviewer, good critic, good writer. He kind of digs up all this material about a writer who no one had ever done a proper biography of. This is a significant British writer of the 19th and 20th century, extremely significant fiction writer. And from this one book, I can tell you he's definitely worth pursuing. And this biography, if you really like good literary biographies, it's excellent. And Ashley writes well, and he loves what he's writing about. It's so refreshing after you read all these academic biographies that are so tedious. Okay, so Kurt Garrett, you're right. I screwed up. It wasn't. I've now read the Wendigo, and I like it. It's pretty good, but I like the Willows better. I like The Man Who Was Loved by the Trees even more. I love the Mike Ashley biography of Algernon Blackwood, and don't be misled by kind of what's horror fiction or weird fiction. It's very interesting, involving fiction. I hope you enjoy it. I really did enjoy this book a great deal, and I'm so glad I made that mistake. So I had to go back and read these stories. All right, take care. We'll be doing more work, more bathing really soon. I'll try not to slip in the bathtub as hard as I did that time. Okay, bye.